Commander Jake Morrison had seen enough war to know when something was different about a soldier. As he walked through the dusty compound in eastern Afghanistan, his trained eyes automatically scanned faces and postures of the Marines around him. Most looked tired, some looked scared, but all looked human. Then he saw her. Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez sat alone on a wooden crate, methodically cleaning her rifle. Her movements were precise, almost robotic. While other soldiers chatted or played cards during their brief downtime, she remained focused on her weapon with an intensity that made Morrison pause mid-step. At first glance, Rodriguez looked like any other Marine. Average height, maybe 5'6", with her dark hair pulled back in regulation style. Her uniform was properly maintained despite the harsh desert conditions. But something in her eyes caught Morrison's attention. They held a distance he recognized from his own reflection after particularly difficult missions. Morrison had commanded SEAL operations for 12 years. He'd worked alongside the best snipers in the military, men who could drop targets at impossible distances. He thought he understood what it took to excel at precision killing, but watching Rodriguez handle her rifle, he sensed something beyond ordinary skill. The compound buzzed with typical military activity. Helicopters came and went, supply trucks kicked up clouds of sand, and radio chatter filled the air. Through it all, Rodriguez remained in her bubble of concentration. Morrison found himself studying her technique as she disassembled and reassembled her weapon with practiced efficiency. "She's something else, isn't she?" Morrison turned to find Captain Tom Bradley, the Marine unit commander, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. Bradley handed him one and nodded toward Rodriguez. "How so?" Morrison asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Best marksman I've seen in 20 years of service," Bradley said quietly. "Hell, best marksman anyone's seen. The woman doesn't miss ever." Morrison sipped his coffee and continued watching Rodriguez. She had moved on to checking her scope, making minute adjustments that most soldiers wouldn't even notice were needed. Her fingers moved with the confidence of someone who knew their equipment better than their own heartbeat. "What's her background?" Morrison asked. Bradley consulted a folder he'd been carrying. Elena Rodriguez, 26 years old, from a small town in Texas. Father was a hunting guide, taught her to shoot when she was 8, joined the Marines straight out of high school, been deployed 3 times, always as a designated marksman. "Any family?" "Parents died in a car accident 2 years ago. No siblings. Military's pretty much all she has left." Bradley paused, watching Rodriguez complete her weapon maintenance. Maybe that's why she's so focused, nothing to distract her from the mission. Morrison understood dedication to duty, but what he observed in Rodriguez seemed to go deeper. There was something almost meditative about how she approached her responsibilities. While other soldiers seemed eager for their deployment to end, she appeared completely at home in the war zone. "What kind of numbers are we talking about?" Morrison asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Bradley looked around, to make sure no one else was listening. "Officially? Classified? Unofficially? She's confirmed more kills than any sniper in current active service. And some of those shots," he shook his head, "some of those shots shouldn't be possible." As if sensing their attention, Rodriguez looked up from her rifle. Her gaze met Morrison's briefly before she returned to her work. In that moment, Morrison saw something that chilled him. Not coldness exactly, but an absence of the emotional weight that usually came with taking lives. It was as if she had compartmentalized that part of warfare so completely that it no longer registered as significant. "She ever talk about what she's done?" Morrison asked. "Never, not once. Some of the guys have tried to get stories out of her, war tales like soldiers always share. She just changes the subject or walks away." Bradley finished his coffee and crushed the cup. "She does her job. She does it better than anyone, but she doesn't talk about it." Morrison had known soldiers who bragged about their kills and others who were haunted by them. Rodriguez seemed to exist in a different category entirely. She appeared to view her lethal effectiveness as simply another job requirement, like maintaining equipment or following orders. The afternoon call to prayer echoed from a nearby village, a haunting sound that always reminded Morrison how far he was from home. Rodriguez finished with her rifle and stood, slinging it across her shoulder with practiced ease. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone completely comfortable with violence. "Sir, you wanted to see me?" Morrison turned to find Rodriguez, standing behind him. He hadn't heard her approach, which was impressive given his own training in stealth. Up close, her eyes were even more striking. Not emotionless exactly, but contained in a way that suggested deep reserves of control. "Staff, Sergeant Rodriguez," Morrison nodded. "I wanted to introduce myself. Commander Morrison, Naval Special Warfare." She shook his offered hand with a firm grip. "Honor to meet you, sir." "I hear you're quite the marksman." Something flickered across her face, too quick to interpret. "I do my job, sir." "Captain Bradley tells me you do it exceptionally well." Rodriguez glanced at Bradley, then back to Morrison. "Every Marine is trained to engage targets effectively, sir. I'm just fortunate to have good equipment and adequate training." Morrison almost smiled at her deflection. Most soldiers with her reputation would show at least some pride in their achievements. Rodriguez spoke as if discussing routine paperwork. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My father taught me basics when I was young. The Corps provided the rest." Her answers remained clipped, professional, revealing nothing personal. Must have been quite a teacher. For the first time, Rodriguez showed genuine emotion. Her expression softened slightly. "He was a good man, sir. Taught me to respect the weapon and understand responsibility." Morrison sensed an opening. "And what did he teach you about responsibility?" Rodriguez straightened, her momentary vulnerability disappearing. "Every shot has consequences, sir. Every decision matters. You don't pull the trigger unless you're absolutely certain." As she spoke, Morrison realized he was looking at someone who had taken that lesson and applied it with devastating effectiveness. Rodriguez wasn't just a good shooter. She was someone who understood the complete weight of lethal force and had chosen to master it anyway. The conversation was interrupted by radio chatter announcing an incoming helicopter. Rodriguez excused herself and walked toward the landing zone, leaving Morrison with more questions than answers about the enigmatic sniper who seemed to carry the burden of war so quietly. 2 days after their first meeting, Morrison found himself assigned to a joint operation where he would witness Rodriguez in action. Intelligence had located a high-value target in a compound 12 miles from their base. The mission required precise elimination of sentries before the main assault team could move in safely. Morrison watched Rodriguez prepare for the operation with the same methodical care she'd shown cleaning her rifle. She studied satellite photos, calculated wind patterns, and memorized every detail of the target area. While other soldiers joked and tried to ease pre-mission tension, she remained completely focused. "Winds coming from the southeast at 8 miles per hour, she told Morrison as they loaded into the transport vehicle. "Temperatures dropping, so I need to adjust for thermal layering. Target distance will be approximately 800 meters from my position." Morrison had worked with enough snipers to know these calculations were complex, requiring split-second adjustments based on multiple variables. Most marksmen struggled with shots beyond 600 meters. Rodriguez spoke about 800 meters as if it were routine. The team moved through the desert under cover of darkness, their vehicles equipped with night vision and sound dampening. Rodriguez rode silently, occasionally checking her equipment but otherwise seeming almost relaxed. Morrison found her calmness unsettling. Even experienced special operations soldiers showed some sign of pre-mission adrenaline. They reached the observation point just before dawn. Rodriguez immediately began setting up her shooting position, selecting her spot with careful consideration of sight lines, escape routes, and concealment. She worked with efficient movements, wasting no motion or time. "Target compound is 1,200 meters northeast," the spotter informed her through radio communication. Morrison frowned. 1,200 meters was significantly further than the 800 she'd prepared for. Most snipers would request repositioning closer to the target. Rodriguez simply adjusted her scope settings and continued her preparations. Confirming. "Target distance at 1,200 meters, she said calmly. "Wind has shifted to southwest 7 miles per hour. I have clear sight lines to all designated positions." Through his binoculars, Morrison could barely make out the compound. Even with magnification, The guards appeared as tiny figures moving around distant buildings. The idea of making precise shots at that range seemed impossible, yet Rodriguez showed no concern. "Primary target is the guard tower, northeast corner," came the mission controller's voice through their radios. "Secondary targets are roving patrols. All targets must be eliminated simultaneously to prevent alerting the compound." Morrison counted at least 4 guards visible in his binoculars. Taking them all down before any could raise an alarm would require incredible timing and accuracy. One missed shot or delayed reaction could compromise the entire operation. Rodriguez had gone completely still. Her breathing became slow and controlled as she peered through her scope. Morrison watched her finger rest lightly on the trigger, every muscle in her body relaxed, yet ready. "Target 1 acquired," she whispered into her radio. "Target 2 acquired. Target 3 moving into position. Target 4 confirmed." The next 30 seconds seemed to last forever. Morrison held his breath, waiting for the shots that would either guarantee the mission's success or alert every hostile in the compound to their presence. The first shot was so quiet Morrison almost missed it. Rodriguez's rifle barely seemed to move, the suppressor reducing the sound to a whisper. Through his binoculars, Morrison saw a guard in the tower suddenly collapse. Before the first target had fully fallen, Rodriguez had already shifted her aim. The second shot came within 2 seconds of the first. Another guard dropped silently to the ground. Morrison watched in fascination as Rodriguez continued her deadly sequence. Each shot was perfectly timed, perfectly placed. Guards fell without making a sound, without having time to alert their companions. Within 10 seconds, 4 men were dead, and the compound remained completely unaware of the threat approaching. "All targets neutralized," Rodriguez reported, in the same calm voice she'd used throughout the operation. "Compound appears secure for main assault." Morrison stared through his binoculars at the results of Rodriguez's work. 4 perfect shots at impossible distances, executed with surgical precision and timing. He'd witnessed some of the finest marksmen in military history, but nothing he'd seen compared to what Rodriguez had just accomplished. "How long have you been making shots like that?" he asked her, as they prepared to move to the next position. Rodriguez was already breaking down her rifle, securing it for transport. "Shots like what, sir?" 1,200-meter kills with that kind of precision. Most snipers can't manage that level of accuracy at half the distance. She paused in her packing, considering his question. "Every shot is different, sir. Distance is just one variable among many." Morrison realized she wasn't being modest or evasive. To Rodriguez, extraordinary marksmanship was simply normal. She had internalized capabilities that others would consider superhuman. The main assault team reported successful infiltration of the compound. The high-value target was captured without resistance. The mission completed flawlessly, thanks to Rodriguez's elimination of the perimeter guards. As they returned to base, Morrison found himself studying Rodriguez more carefully. She showed no signs of satisfaction or pride in her performance. If anything, she seemed slightly disappointed that the mission had been so straightforward. "Ever miss?" Morrison asked during the return journey. Rodriguez looked at him with genuine confusion. "Miss what, sir?" "A target, a shot you were supposed to make." She was quiet for several minutes, apparently considering whether such a thing was possible. "No, sir," she finally answered. "I don't take shots I'm not certain of." Morrison began to understand what made Rodriguez so effective. It wasn't just her technical skill, though that was clearly exceptional. She possessed an almost supernatural ability to calculate variables and assess probabilities. She only pulled the trigger when success was mathematically certain. Back at the base, word of the mission's success spread quickly. Other soldiers looked at Rodriguez with a mixture of respect and wariness. Her reputation for impossible accuracy was growing, but so was the sense that she operated on a different level from normal humans. Morrison watched Rodriguez clean her rifle with the same methodical care she'd shown before the mission. 4 more kills added to her count. 4 more perfect shots at distances most people couldn't even see clearly. Yet she treated the maintenance routine as if it were the most important part of her day. "Staff Sergeant," Morrison said as she finished her work. She looked up, waiting for him to continue. "That was exceptional shooting today. Some of the finest marksmanship I've witnessed in 12 years of special operations. Rodriguez nodded politely. Thank you, sir. The mission was successful. Morrison realized she hadn't heard his praise as a compliment. To her, exceptional marksmanship was simply meeting expectations. The idea of failing to eliminate targets at 1,200 meters apparently didn't exist in her mental framework. As night fell over the compound, Morrison found himself wondering what kind of person could develop such absolute confidence in their lethal abilities. Rodriguez had killed 4 men that morning with less emotional response than most people showed swatting flies. Yet she didn't seem cold or cruel, just completely disconnected from the human cost of her precision. Morrison couldn't shake his fascination with Rodriguez's capabilities. Over the next week, he made excuses to observe her training routines and spoke with Marines who had served alongside her on previous deployments. The picture that emerged was both impressive and disturbing. Corporal Mike Stevens had been Rodriguez's spotter during her second deployment. When Morrison approached him privately, Stevens seemed reluctant to discuss his experiences. "She's the best there is, sir," Stevens said carefully. "Never seen anything like her skills." But Morrison pressed, sensing hesitation. Stevens glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "It's not natural, sir. The distances she can manage, the conditions she can shoot in, things that should be impossible." "Give me an example." Stevens was quiet for a long moment. "We were providing overwatch for a convoy that got ambushed. Enemy position was on a ridge about 2,000 meters away. Heavy wind, sandstorm reducing visibility to maybe 50 meters. Command was ready to call, in air support. Morrison waited, knowing there was more to the story. Rodriguez asked for 10 minutes, said she could see a solution." Stevens shook his head. "She set up in that sandstorm like it was perfect weather, calculated wind patterns by watching dust movement that I couldn't even detect. And 3 shots, 3 kills. Ended the ambush in less than 30 seconds. Stevens met Morrison's eyes. "Sir, I was looking through spotting scopes and couldn't make out human shapes at that distance in those conditions. She was shooting with iron sights and dropping targets like they were standing right in front of her." Morrison had heard rumors about Rodriguez's longest confirmed kills, but Stevens was describing something beyond extraordinary marksmanship. The combination of distance, weather conditions, and equipment limitations should have made accurate shooting impossible. How did she explain it? "She didn't. Just packed up her rifle and said the convoy could proceed safely." Stevens paused. "That's when I started wondering if Rodriguez sees things differently than other people." Morrison decided to test that theory. He arranged for Rodriguez to participate in a marksmanship assessment that would push the limits of even the finest military snipers. The course included targets at various distances, some partially concealed, others requiring shots through narrow gaps between obstacles. Rodriguez approached the assessment with her usual methodical preparation. She studied the course layout, calculated environmental factors, and checked her equipment with practiced efficiency. Morrison positioned himself where he could observe both her technique and her targets. The first target was positioned at 600 meters, well within the range of most qualified marksmen. Rodriguez's shot was perfect, striking dead center of the target area. Morrison noted that she took less time aiming than most snipers would need for a much closer shot. The second target was at 900 meters, partially concealed behind a concrete barrier with only a small portion visible. Rodriguez adjusted her position slightly, aimed for perhaps 3 seconds, and fired. Morrison watched through binoculars as the bullet found its mark with mathematical precision. As the targets became more challenging, Rodriguez's performance remained flawless. Shots at 1,200 meters in crosswinds that would challenge Olympic marksmen. Targets visible through gaps barely wider than the bullets themselves. Distances that required her to calculate bullet drop and wind drift to extraordinary precision. What impressed Morrison most was Rodriguez's consistency. Each shot was taken with the same deliberate calm, the same minimal aiming time, the same perfect accuracy. She showed no signs of fatigue or decreased performance as the challenges increased. The final target was positioned at 1,500 meters, barely visible even through high-powered optics. Morrison watched Rodriguez study the target through her scope for longer than usual, making minute adjustments to her position and equipment. "That's beyond effective range for standard ammunition," Morrison commented. Rodriguez glanced at him briefly. "Standard conditions rarely apply in combat, sir." She returned to her scope, making a final calculation. The shot, when it came, seemed impossible. Morrison watched the distant target and saw the unmistakable mark of another perfect hit. "How?" Morrison asked as Rodriguez began securing her rifle. "How what, sir? How do you make shots that other snipers consider impossible?" Rodriguez seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. "I calculate the variables and adjust accordingly, sir. Same as any marksman." Morrison realized she wasn't being evasive. Rodriguez truly didn't understand why others found her capabilities extraordinary. To her, precision shooting was a matter of proper technique and calculation. The fact that her calculations produced results others couldn't achieve didn't register as unusual. That evening, Morrison sat in his quarters reviewing Rodriguez's service record in detail. Her confirmed kill count was classified, but Captain Bradley had shared enough information to paint a remarkable picture. During her 3 deployments, Rodriguez had eliminated targets at distances ranging from standard engagement ranges to shots that defied military doctrine. More interesting were the circumstances of those kills. Rodriguez had repeatedly succeeded in conditions where other snipers would refuse to attempt shots. Bad weather, poor visibility, extreme distances, moving targets in complex terrain. She seemed to thrive in situations that challenged conventional marksmanship wisdom. Morrison found incident reports describing Rodriguez's performance during particularly difficult operations. One report mentioned her eliminating 6 enemy combatants in 15 seconds during an ambush. Another described her taking out a sniper team at nearly 2,000 meters while under counter-battery fire. Each report was written in standard military language, but Morrison could read between the lines. Officers were documenting Rodriguez's achievements while struggling to explain how she accomplished them. Her capabilities consistently exceeded what training and equipment should have made possible. The most disturbing report dealt with a hostage situation where Rodriguez had been called upon to eliminate a captor holding a civilian. The shot required threading a bullet through a narrow window, past several obstacles to strike a target positioned inches from an innocent person. The report noted that Rodriguez had taken the shot without hesitation, achieving perfect placement that killed the hostage taker instantly while leaving the civilian unharmed. What troubled Morrison was the addendum noting that Rodriguez had shown no stress response before or after taking what most snipers would consider the most pressure-filled shot of their careers. Morrison closed the files and stared out his window at the desert landscape. Rodriguez was undoubtedly the most effective marksman he'd ever encountered, but her emotional detachment from killing was beginning to concern him. Effective soldiers needed to be able to take lives when necessary, but they also needed to maintain their humanity. He decided it was time to understand what drove Rodriguez's deadly precision. Tomorrow he would try to get past her professional demeanor and discover what lay beneath her extraordinary capabilities. Morrison suspected that, understanding, Rodriguez would require looking beyond marksmanship techniques into something much more complex and potentially troubling. Morrison found Rodriguez in the compound's small recreation area, reading a technical manual about ballistics calculations. While other soldiers played cards or watched movies, she studied the mathematics of precision shooting. Her dedication was admirable, but Morrison wondered if it masked something deeper. "Mind if I sit?" Morrison asked, approaching with 2 bottles of water. Rodriguez looked up from her manual and nodded. "Of course, sir." Morrison settled onto the bench beside her, noting that the manual she was reading covered advanced topics that most snipers would never encounter. Wind drift calculations for extreme distances, atmospheric pressure variations, bullet trajectory, modifications. She was studying these complex formulas with the same focus others might give to entertainment. "Heavy reading," Morrison observed. "Knowledge improves performance, sir. There's always something new to learn about precision shooting." Morrison opened his water bottle and took a drink, considering his approach. Rodriguez had deflected every attempt at personal conversation, but he sensed there were important answers beneath her professional exterior. "Tell me about your father," Morrison said. For a moment, Rodriguez's careful control slipped. Her expression softened and she set down the manual. "He was everything to me, sir. Taught me everything important." "When did you start shooting?" 8 years old. Dad took me hunting rabbits on our property in Texas. A slight smile crossed her face. First lesson was respect. Respect for the weapon, respect for what you're hunting, respect for the consequences of pulling the trigger. Morrison saw genuine emotion in Rodriguez's eyes as she spoke about her father. It was the first time she'd shown real human connection since he'd met her. Must have been a good teacher. The best. He understood that shooting wasn't just about hitting targets. It was about understanding responsibility. Rodriguez paused, her expression growing distant. He always said that every life has value even in war, that if you're going to take a life, you better be certain it's necessary. "And you believe that?" Rodriguez was quiet for several minutes, apparently considering the question carefully. "I believe in completing missions effectively, sir. Every target I engage represents a threat to my fellow Marines or to innocent civilians. Eliminating that threat quickly and cleanly serves the greater good." Morrison noticed how Rodriguez had shifted from personal philosophy to military doctrine. She seemed more comfortable discussing killing in abstract professional terms than examining the emotional reality of taking lives. "How many people have you killed, Elena?" The use of her first name seemed to surprise Rodriguez. She studied Morrison's face, perhaps trying to determine why he was asking such a direct question. "I don't keep count, sir, but you know the number." Rodriguez was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. 237 confirmed kills, 18 probable. 3 accidental civilian casualties that still keep me awake some nights. Morrison felt a chill at the numbers. 237 confirmed kills made Rodriguez one of the deadliest snipers in military history. The fact that she remembered the exact count despite claiming not to keep track revealed how deeply each death was embedded in her memory. That's a heavy burden to carry. "It's the job, sir. Every one of those kills prevented harm to friendly forces or innocent people. The mathematics are simple. Eliminate threats efficiently to minimize overall casualties." Morrison noticed how Rodriguez consistently reduced killing to mathematical equations. It was as if she'd found a way to process the emotional weight of taking lives by treating each death as a solved problem, rather than ended human existence. "What about the 3 civilian casualties?" Rodriguez's composure cracked slightly. "Mistakes. Bad intelligence in 2 cases. Equipment malfunction in the 3rd. 3 people died because I trusted information that was wrong or because I didn't properly maintain my rifle. That wasn't your fault. It was completely my fault, sir. I'm responsible for every bullet that leaves my rifle. Those 3 deaths were preventable if I'd been more careful, more thorough." Rodriguez's voice carried pain that she usually kept hidden. "They're why I spend so much time studying, training, preparing. I won't make those mistakes again." Morrison began to understand Rodriguez's obsessive dedication to perfection. She wasn't just trying to be the best sniper possible. She was trying to ensure she never again killed someone who didn't deserve to die. "Is that why you don't miss anymore?" Rodriguez looked at him sharply. "I never missed intentionally, sir. But those 3 deaths taught me that good enough isn't acceptable when lives hang in the balance. Perfect accuracy isn't just about pride, it's about moral responsibility." Morrison realized he was seeing the real Rodriguez for the first time. Beneath the professional calm and technical precision was someone carrying enormous guilt over 3 accidental deaths. Her extraordinary accuracy wasn't just skill, it was penance. "Elena, you can't be perfect all the time. No one can. I can be perfect when it matters, sir. When someone's life depends on my accuracy, I can control every variable that affects bullet placement. Wind speed, atmospheric pressure, target movement, equipment performance. I've studied every factor that could cause a miss." "But you're human. Humans make mistakes." Rodriguez shook her head firmly. "Not anymore. I've eliminated the possibility of error through preparation and discipline. Every shot I take now is calculated to mathematical certainty." Morrison saw both the strength and the tragedy in Rodriguez's philosophy. She had transformed herself into a nearly perfect killing machine, but the cost was her own humanity. She'd removed chance, emotion, and uncertainty from lethal decision-making, creating a system that was devastatingly effective, but psychologically unsustainable. What happens when the war ends? Morrison asked. When you don't need those skills anymore? Rodriguez looked confused by the question. There will always be another mission, sir, another threat to neutralize. The mathematics of precision shooting don't change based on location or conflict. Morrison realized that Rodriguez couldn't imagine life beyond her role as a sniper. She'd defined herself so completely by her ability to kill accurately that she had no identity outside of warfare. You're 26 years old, Elena. You have a lifetime ahead of you after your military service ends. This is my life, sir. These skills, this responsibility. I can't imagine doing anything else. As Rodriguez spoke, Morrison saw the true cost of her extraordinary capabilities. She had become so focused on perfection in killing that she'd lost sight of living. Her skills made her invaluable in combat, but they were also trapping her in a narrow existence defined entirely by death and precision. The conversation was interrupted by a radio call summoning Morrison to a briefing about the next day's mission. As he stood to leave, Rodriguez returned to her ballistics manual, already retreating back into the technical details that provided her comfort. Walking away, Morrison wondered if Rodriguez's perfect accuracy was worth the price she was paying. She had become the ultimate weapon, but Morrison wasn't sure she was still entirely human. The mission briefing revealed intelligence about a high-value terrorist leader planning an attack on a civilian market. The target would be meeting with his lieutenants in a heavily fortified compound surrounded by innocent families. Standard. Assault tactics would result in significant civilian casualties, making the operation politically and morally unacceptable. Morrison studied the satellite photographs with growing concern. The compound was positioned in the center of a dense residential area. Children played in nearby yards, women hung laundry on rooftops, and elderly men gathered at tea houses within 2 blocks of the target location. We need surgical precision, Colonel Patterson announced to the assembled officers. 1 shot, 1 kill, minimal collateral damage. The target will be visible for approximately 30 seconds during a scheduled meeting on the compound's roof. Morrison looked around the briefing room, noting the worried expressions on experienced officers' faces. The shot would require threading. A bullet through a narrow gap between buildings, accounting for wind patterns disrupted by urban structures, and achieving perfect accuracy at nearly 2,000 meters. Sir, that's beyond the effective range of standard sniper systems. Captain, Bradley observed. Colonel Patterson nodded grimly. Which is why we're assigning Staff Sergeant Rodriguez to the mission. According to her record, she's the only marksman we have who can guarantee success under these conditions. Morrison felt a chill of recognition. This was exactly the kind of impossible shot that Rodriguez seemed to view as routine. The mission would rely entirely on her extraordinary capabilities, with no backup plan if she failed. After the briefing, Morrison found Rodriguez studying the target photographs with intense concentration. She had spread the images across a table and was making careful measurements with a ruler and protractor. What do you see? Morrison asked. Clear shot opportunity during the 14-second window when the target moves from the stairwell to the meeting position, Rodriguez replied without looking up. Wind patterns will be complex due to urban terrain, but predictable based on building heights and orientations. Morrison examined the photographs more closely. Even with magnification, he could barely identify human figures on the distant rooftop. The idea of making a precise shot at that range through the urban maze seemed impossible. Distance? 2,047 meters from optimal shooting position. Bullet will need to clear 3 intermediate buildings and thread a gap approximately 2 meters wide. Rodriguez traced the trajectory path with her finger. Challenging but manageable. Morrison noticed that Rodriguez seemed energized by the technical challenge. While other soldiers would be intimidated by the mission requirements, she appeared to view it as an interesting problem to solve. What's your confidence level? Rodriguez looked at him with slight confusion. 100%, sir. I've calculated all relevant variables. The shot is mathematically certain, Morrison realized this was what separated Rodriguez from other snipers. Where others saw impossible odds, she saw mathematical equations with solutions. Her confidence wasn't bravado, it was absolute certainty, based on her calculations. The next morning, Morrison accompanied Rodriguez to her shooting position on a rooftop overlooking the target area. She had arrived before dawn to study wind patterns and atmospheric conditions, making minute adjustments to her equipment based on real-time environmental factors. Morrison watched through binoculars as Rodriguez set up her rifle with practiced precision. Every movement was economical and purposeful. She tested wind direction by dropping small pieces of paper and observing their drift patterns. She adjusted her scope settings multiple times, making calculations that seemed to account for variables Morrison hadn't even considered. Target compound is active, the radio observer reported. Multiple individuals visible on the rooftop. Target identification pending. Rodriguez had gone completely still behind her rifle. Morrison could see her controlling her breathing, slowing her heart rate, entering the zone of absolute focus that made her deadly accuracy possible. Through his binoculars, Morrison could barely make out figures moving on the distant rooftop. Even with magnification, they appeared as tiny shapes against the urban landscape. The idea of identifying specific individuals at that distance seemed impossible, let alone making a precise shot. Target confirmed, the observer announced. High value. Individual visible on rooftop moving toward meeting position. Morrison watched Rodriguez make a final adjustment to her scope. Her finger moved to the trigger, but she didn't rush the shot. She waited, calculating the perfect moment when all variables aligned for guaranteed success. Wind shift detected. Rodriguez whispered into her radio. Adjusting for new conditions. Target still acquired. Morrison held his breath as Rodriguez prepared to take what might be the longest confirmed kill shot in military history. The margin for error was 0. Miss, and the target would disappear into the compound's protection. Worse, a missed shot might alert the terrorists to surveillance and prompt them to accelerate their planned attack. The shot, when it came, was anticlimactic. Rodriguez's rifle barely seemed to move. The suppressed sound was no louder than a book dropping on a table. Morrison immediately looked toward the target compound, watching through his binoculars for confirmation. For several seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then Morrison saw a figure on the distant rooftop suddenly collapse. Other figures on the roof scattered in confusion, unsure what had happened or where the threat had originated. Target down, the observer confirmed. Clean kill, no collateral damage. Mission successful. Rodriguez was already breaking down her rifle, securing it for transport. She showed no signs of satisfaction or stress. The impossible shot had been just another routine task completed successfully. 2,047 meters, Morrison said, still processing what he'd witnessed. 2,047.3 meters, Rodriguez corrected absently. Atmospheric conditions were slightly better than predicted, so bullet drop was minimal. Morrison stared at her, amazed by both her precision and her casual attitude toward an extraordinary achievement. She had just made one of the longest confirmed kill shots in military history, potentially saving dozens of civilian lives by preventing a terrorist attack. How do you feel about what you just accomplished? Rodriguez paused in her packing, apparently considering the question. Satisfied that the mission parameters were met successfully, sir. The threat has been neutralized with minimal risk to friendly forces and civilian populations. Morrison realized that Rodriguez didn't think of her achievement in terms of personal accomplishment. To her, the shot was simply the logical solution to a tactical problem. The fact that it required extraordinary skill and precision didn't factor into her emotional response. As they prepared to leave the shooting position, Morrison found himself both impressed and troubled by Rodriguez's capabilities. She had proven herself capable of eliminating targets at distances that challenged the laws of physics, but her complete emotional detachment from killing was becoming more concerning. The mission had been a complete success. Intelligence reports confirmed that the terrorist cell had disbanded following the loss of their leader. The planned attack on the civilian market had been prevented. Dozens of innocent lives had been saved by Rodriguez's precision, but Morrison wondered. 3 months later, Morrison received orders transferring him back to the United States. His deployment was ending, but Rodriguez would remain in Afghanistan for another 6 months. As he prepared to leave, Morrison felt compelled to have one final conversation with the enigmatic sniper who had challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare and human capability. He found Rodriguez at her usual spot, cleaning her rifle in the early evening light. The routine had become so familiar that Morrison could predict each movement she would make. Her dedication to equipment maintenance bordered on ritual, performed with religious precision every single day. "I'm shipping out tomorrow," Morrison told her. Rodriguez looked up from her work, showing the first genuine surprise he'd seen from her. "Sir? I thought you were assigned here through next month." "Change of orders. They need experienced SEAL commanders stateside for training new recruits." Morrison sat down beside her. "I wanted to talk before I left." Rodriguez set down her cleaning, supplies giving him her full attention. Over the months they'd known each other, she had developed what Morrison recognized as respect for his opinions, even when she didn't fully understand his concerns. "What happens to you after this deployment?" "Ends," Morrison asked. "Another deployment, sir. Command has indicated I'll be assigned wherever precision shooting capabilities are needed most." Rodriguez spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing routine administrative details. "Elena, you've been in combat zones for 3 straight deployments. Don't you want to go home?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, apparently considering a question she'd never asked herself. "Home is where my skills are most useful, sir. Right now, that's here." Morrison realized that Rodriguez had no life outside of military service. Her parents were dead, she had no siblings, no romantic relationships, no interests beyond precision shooting. The military had become her entire world. "You're 26 years old. You could have a family, a career outside the military, a normal life." "This is my life, sir. These skills I've developed, they're not transferable to civilian applications. I can't imagine doing anything else." Rodriguez paused, her expression showing rare uncertainty. "What would I do in the civilian world?" Morrison saw the fear behind her question. Rodriguez had become so specialized, so focused on military precision shooting, that she couldn't envision any other existence. She was trapped by her own extraordinary capabilities. You could teach, train law enforcement snipers, work with military contractors, maybe even Olympic shooting programs. Those applications don't require the same level of precision, sir. Without the life or death stakes, without the complex variables of combat shooting, the skills become academic. Morrison understood what Rodriguez was really saying. She needed the intensity of combat to feel alive, to exercise her capabilities fully. Peaceful applications of her skills would feel like playing games compared to the ultimate stakes of warfare. "What about the cost, Elena? What's all this precision doing to you as a person?" Rodriguez looked genuinely confused. "Cost, sir? You've killed over 200 people. You've isolated yourself from normal human relationships. You've reduced everything to mathematical equations and technical problems." Morrison spoke gently, trying to help her see what others observed. "You're becoming something beyond human." Rodriguez considered his words carefully. If becoming more precise, more effective, more capable of protecting innocent lives means becoming less human, then perhaps that's an acceptable trade-off. Morrison felt chilled by her response. Rodriguez had consciously chosen to sacrifice her humanity for increased lethality. She viewed the transformation as positive, necessary, even moral. But what happens when you can't be perfect anymore? When age or injury affects your abilities? For the first time, Morrison saw fear flicker across Rodriguez's face. The possibility of losing her precision shooting capabilities was apparently the only future that truly frightened her. "I maintain my equipment and my skills to prevent that possibility, sir." "Elena, everyone ages. Everyone's reflexes slow down eventually. No one maintains peak performance forever." Rodriguez was quiet for several minutes, staring at her rifle, as if it held answers to questions she didn't want to ask. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "Then I hope I die in combat before that happens, sir." Morrison felt a profound sadness at her words. Rodriguez would rather die than face a future where she wasn't the perfect killing machine she'd become. She had invested so completely in her lethal capabilities that losing them would mean losing everything she identified as herself. There's more to life than being the perfect sniper, Elena. Not for me, sir. This is what I am. This is my contribution to the world. Without these skills, without this precision, I'm nothing. Morrison realized that Rodriguez had painted herself into a psychological corner. She had become so extraordinary at killing that she couldn't imagine being ordinary at living. Her skills had become both her greatest achievement and her prison. As the sun set over the Afghan landscape, Morrison made one final attempt to reach the human being hidden beneath Rodriguez's professional exterior. Elena, promise me something. She looked at him expectantly. When your military service ends, try to find something else that gives your life meaning. Something that doesn't involve taking lives. Rodriguez was quiet for a long time. I'll consider it, sir. Morrison knew it was the best promise he could extract from someone so completely defined by her deadly capabilities. As he prepared to leave, he wondered if Rodriguez would ever find peace outside of warfare, or if she was destined to remain forever trapped by her own extraordinary precision. The next morning, Morrison departed for the United States. His last image of Rodriguez was her usual position, methodically cleaning her rifle in preparation for another day of potential violence. She had become the most effective killing machine he'd ever encountered. But Morrison wondered if the price of that effectiveness had been too high. Years later, Morrison would occasionally see classified reports mentioning impossible long-range shots in various global conflict zones. He never saw Rodriguez's name in those reports, but he recognized her signature precision. She was still out there somewhere, still perfect in her deadly accuracy, still trapped by the very skills that made her extraordinary. Morrison often wondered if Rodriguez had ever found anything beyond warfare to give her life meaning, or if she remained forever frozen in that moment of perfect lethal precision, unable to imagine existing as anything other than the ultimate sniper. The woman who never missed had perhaps missed the most important target of all, a normal human life.